The Le Mans Ultimate developers may have gone just a little bit too far with their tyre model changes to the GT3 cars in the simulator, and in this video I'm going to explain why I think this update might have been quite a misstep from the LMU developers, maybe not from the perspective of esports players, but from the perspective of the vast majority of people playing this simulator. Before we get into this controversial topic and upset people, make sure you are a subscriber so you then have the power to unsubscribe when we do upset you, and you can click the like button, though set your TC high and be very careful, because if you click the like button just a bit too hard, your finger will leave your hand and crash into the wall. Right, so to be clear, I'm actually a really big fan of Le Mans Ultimate. I really enjoy how it drives. I think it's well worth getting. The online structure, hourly races, longer races, and even the update bringing new features, driver swaps, liveries, and a whole bunch of stuff is absolutely fantastic. Also, really nice to see the developer constantly working on this, constantly making changes, some for the better, some for the worse. So I'm doing this video from the perspective of a fan of this title. We have hundreds of hours playing this, and as I say, I really recommend getting it. But for those of you that are fresh to this or haven't been paying attention, LMU recently received a fairly sizable update yesterday or the other day, and with that update they significantly changed the tyres on the GT3 cars, or LMGT3, but they're basically GT3 cars. Now, the big change in the tyres, largely from a driver's perspective, means that the cars now are a lot harder to hold in slip, and they've effectively managed to remove the fabled R-Factor 2 slip slide, which is basically the ability to hold the car into a rather baked and fairly substantial four-wheel drift through every single corner, or just holding the cars into massive amounts of slip through every single corner. And that was a problem in R-Factor 2 and LMU, because if you were a more skilled sim racer, or even just moderately skilled sim racer, the game largely evolved around you turning all the TC off and getting the car into one of these slides for every corner, driving the racing line, and that would generally be faster. But also, certain tracks like Portimao, some of the more flowing tracks, you would just be sort of sliding the car all over the place, and that would actually be a fast way to drive. So the general driving was just really quite sloppy in many ways. Fun, but not quite as peaky or as bitey or as stable as you would generally expect GT3 cars to be driven around those tracks. With the update, it seems the developers have largely addressed this issue, and you can now no longer drift every single corner, and you generally will have to drive this now in a much more refined and more stable manner. You'll also find now that you have to drive the cars a lot more using the brake pedal and trail braking to turn the vehicle, or the accelerator and oversteer or lift off oversteer to turn the vehicle, than you use the steering wheel. Previously, you had much more steering wheel authority and steering wheel control over the vehicle. Now you have much more pedal authority. In real cars, they're kind of a bit balanced between how much steering wheel authority versus pedal authority there is. It can also depend on car setup in real cars, and that also depends on the type of cars in real cars. But with driving sims, when they change the tyre model or fundamental physics, you basically tends to push everything in one direction and tends to promote a singular driving style. The singular driving style that you get in LMU now is actually in many ways much closer to iRacing than R-Factor 2, so it's quite a significant deviation in how you now have to drive Le Mans Ultimate. Again, that's not to say it's terrible or universally a bad thing. I think more skilled sim racers will enjoy having a less of a baked approach to taking corners. They'll enjoy having to be more precise on the brake, and the accelerator in order to get more out of the cars, and they'll actually probably enjoy a more punishing simulator in that you can't just get away with throwing the cars around so much. More experienced and, as I say, more skilled sim racers will likely enjoy that more than less skilled sim racers, and could make the game feel deeper for them. However, unfortunately for lower skilled drivers, the changes as they are now really do massively over punish very specific situations, and even if you use TC and ABS, you will have many times in the simulator now where the car will just lose traction that's completely uncatchable. And those situations can be if you just turn slightly too hard, when the tyres happen to have been slightly too warm, or maybe you've done an action previous that was a bit over-egged, or the tyres are a little bit more weared out. So you could just turn a little bit too much and that's it, it's gone, no warning at all. You could also maybe be on a little bit more curb than what you've done before, and that happens to be enough to push the tyres over. That's it, you're done. And you could just be doing a move behind another vehicle, avoiding a crash, and that's it. It's very easy to accidentally push the tyres over to a point of no return. And I would say to an unrealistic degree, because you can catch a lot of stuff in a real GT3 car. You can actually be incredibly egregious with how you drive real GT3 cars, even on competitive setups or on very safe setups. They tend to be relatively recoverable and catchable vehicles. You have to keep in mind that GT3 cars are designed for very rich people to pretend to be pro race drivers. There are works drivers, there are very skilled GT3 drivers to be very quick and consistently quick over long periods of time and not wear tyres out and everything else. That is an incredible skill, and also to adjust with minimal amounts of time of qualifying and practice and to get the most out of a vehicle. That is an incredible skill. That's the true skill of race driving, to get the most out of any vehicle with variable conditions. But in optimal conditions, with fresh tyres, perfect car, perfect everything, perfect track, they are a relatively catchable vehicle by design. Because if someone spent £250,000 to drive the car, you don't want them to bin it so the other pay driver can't drive it, right? It's pretty obvious. They're designed to be like reasonably catchable. And with the update now, it is really quite easy for the tyres to just turn off. Now, obviously, as I say, high-level drivers, people with a lot of time, you can just memorise what you can and can't do. You can do a load of practice, you can do the situations that cause the tyres to go over the limit in an uncatchable way, and then you note it down in your brain. Right, I can't take that curb there, I can't do that corner at that amount of angle, I can't do this, I can't do this, can't do this, can't do this. And you practice yourself to rote memorise all the fail conditions, and then you won't be affected by those fail conditions. That might sound familiar. That is literally how you have to drive iRacing with most cars in iRacing. A little bit less so since iRacing's update now, but that is basically the iRacing process of driving. Unfortunately, it's not the process really of driving a real car. You can watch any onboard of GT3 and many vehicles, and you'll see drivers constantly doing quite big corrections, pushing the car in too much, feeling the grip with the wheel, bringing the car back. And it is a very punishing form of driving for people that have less time and are just trying to drive things as they're happening, or being a reactive driver instead of being largely a preemptive driver. So, even though the older tyre model, or the older way this handled, was, I would say, objectively unrealistic in the amount of slide and a little bit simplistic in the slip slide technique, and probably a bit too simplistic for really high skilled drivers, what it did mean is that people that are of a moderate or low skill level could jump in, drive, make a mistake, catch it, drive it off and continue racing. They didn't have to do the ridiculous sim racing rote memorization process that esports drivers won't mind doing, but you know, most people don't have time to do, and again, it's still actually unrealistic to the bulk of driving real-world GT3 cars. So the previous version made LMU really stand out for the vast majority of people that want to do a GT3 race but not be slapped in the face with a soggy fish as they were, for example, in iRacing. And that contrast really made Le Mans Ultimate a lot more appealing to drive than iRacing, along with its price, along with its graphics, along with some of its other features. You know, it all went together really nicely to make LMU kind of like the refuge of people that wanted something more realistic than iRacing. I still say it is still more realistic than iRacing now, but even in the past it was more realistic than iRacing, but also more forgiving than iRacing, or just a more pleasurable game to play. I think people sometimes forget that they're playing racing simulators for fun. It's a video game, you know, and a more forgiving video game, a slightly unrealistically forgiving video game, for the vast majority of people is going to be a more fun video game than a unrealistically unforgiving video game. Well, apart from people that are total masochists and a bit mental, esports drivers. So, yes, the big thing is the changes, in a sense, are a positive in many ways, but overall, for the vast majority of people that play Le Mans Ultimate, the changes are actually quite a negative. And I would say as well, another really big downside of these tyre model changes, with you having to drive more preemptively and with the tyres being more prone to just giving out without much warning, it really reduces the amount of productive lines, it really reduces the amount of overtake opportunities, and GT3 cars on a lot of the tracks are particularly poor for overtaking opportunities. GT3 cars have ABS, they have TC, they're quite big cars, they're quite cumbersome cars, they're quite wide compared to a lot of the tracks, so it's actually quite hard to overtake in GT3, and the more the tyres abruptly punish you for going slightly over the limit, the less options you're going to have, the less availability for overtakes you'll have. Though, ironically, from the races we've done recently, you're probably going to be overtaking less people anyway, because more people will just be spinning and losing control of the car, so you'll get more free passes until people memorise what they can and can't do. But these changes do make the racing worse. And then I would also say, if you're going to have tyres, maybe if let's say this was totally realistic how the tyres are now, but if you're going to have tyres that are more abrupt and lose grip aggressively into uncatchable slides aggressively, your simulator has to have much better force feedback and way higher detail force feedback, because a crucial part of dealing with tyres that are close to the limit or a car setup that's very loose and very oversteery, a crucial component of that is, in real cars, being able to feel that in your bottom, but also in real cars being able to feel that through the steering wheel and other aspects of what's communicated to the driver. Unfortunately, LMU's force feedback is super dull and really not that communicative for the specific slip of the tyre. LMU has really good suspension travel force feedback when you load the suspension up and that tugs on the wheel, has really good road texture, curbing texture, and through sustained corners you will feel the car start to wash out at moderate to high speed. That's all reasonably fine, but those are all things that are actually not really requiring you to use particularly fine driver skills. You know, they're easy situations, they're very progressive and slow situations. LMU has very poor force feedback, for, as I say, for the absolute slip of the tyre, a very like a detailed load change, not bumps, not vibrations, but front end feel load change. It's really bad in LMU. Sure, it's a bit better on a 21 Newton meter wheel versus a 12 Newton meter wheel, and some wheels will be smoother and more detailed than others, but something like LMU or something that's more abrupt in slip, you need force feedback that's going to be detailed on like an 8 Newton meter wheel, or any wheel on the market should really still have a load of detail coming through it, but it doesn't in LMU. So They've made it a lot harder. They've made it requiring of a lot more preemptive driving. They've made the sim require a lot more rote memorization of basic driving. They've probably made the racing worse. I think from a gameplay perspective, they've gone too far. And even, I think you could argue from a simulation perspective, it's actually unrealistically unforgiving now. So it's just arbitrarily different. Yeah, it's just arbitrarily different. For the most part, I'd imagine esports drivers will be largely happy with this update, but I'd imagine your average LMU player will be really put off by this update. I think it will actually put a hell of a lot of people off LMU. And the big irony is the iRacing recently did an update to their GT3, which has made their cars in many ways easier to drive than the LMU GT3s. iRacing still has huge problems with its tyre model, with its GT3. They still get stuck in flash heated slides. You do one slide, the next slide is totally messed up. The cars are really sluggish in iRacing and gloopy, and they don't purchase the road or have actual proper snap oversteer. And so iRacing is totally mental and not realistic at all, but and probably still less realistic than LMU. But it's kind of funny that iRacing is actually probably, for most people, especially those that are quite a bit off the pace, probably easier now to drive than LMU, or less frustrating. I did not expect that to be the case. It was not on my 2025 bingo card. So, yeah, that is basically a big summary of the largest point with LMU. Before any of you guys say it, we will have this comment under the video. No, you putting TC on and ABS and changing those settings, no, that's not the solution. Sure, that will make it less likely that you'll get into more slip and you can be worse on your throttle, but it's just going to mask the fundamental physics. And people are going to say, oh, car setups, and it's like, yeah, sure, if you have more rear downforce, you will get less rear slip and the cars will be less prone to snap oversteer in certain scenarios. But you'll also have more understeer in certain scenarios if you change the setup. Again, setup can quite drastically change how a car handles, obviously, but setup will effectively be masking or emphasising the actual tyre model implementation and the fundamental. So even with different setups, everything I've said in this video will still apply. If you've got a looser setup, you will just experience the nature of the tyres quicker. You'll just have to start counter steering quicker, but you know you're still getting the same underlying physics. You just, certain setups will avoid it or mask it compared to others. So no, it's not a setup thing either. Though sure, you could use setups to make things more drivable, but that is beside the point. And then lastly, stop whenever someone points out these sorts of things with a simulator or differences in a simulator. You can't just say skill issue as a way to shut them down. Sure, certain people do need to be at a certain skill level, and maybe some people can't catch things that are very catchable, and some people do overdrive and they need to dial things down. But, you know, if you have people that have 5,000 hours of sim racing practice, or they're just pointing out exactly what the differences are, saying skill issue on its own does not help. It doesn't add anything to the conversation. So that doesn't work. I don't know why people do that. But there you go, guys. That's it. That's his video. We'll see what happens with LMU. I hope that they maybe dial things in the other way. They've gone too far one way. Maybe they'll go back the other way a bit. I hope they dial things in a bit more. And also, really, a big thing for me is I hope they actually get the force feedback to be a lot more detailed. Because then I think in all scenarios, that would just make it so much more drivable. And out of all the major sims at the moment, LMU probably has some of the lowest detail force feedback after ACC for describing this, as I say, the tyre slip curve, the front end slip to high detail. So that would be really, really nice, though obviously not an easy thing to fix from a development perspective. But still worth having, still fun to play. But that's my summary of the tyre update. Thank you for watching. Gamer Muscle reporting from under the ground. Happy tea drinking, take care, and goodbye.